Welcome everybody for the second session of today's AT3 Center Leadership Symposium Virtual 2022. During this session, we're going to be exploring the AT Access tools in the AT Network database, and we're proud to have with us a wide variety of great presenters from Georgia Tech and from the University of Washington. Carolyn Phillips is with us here today, who's a co-director at CIDI and director of Georgia Tools for Life. Maureen Linden, who is the director of research at CIDI at Georgia Tech. Nathan Moon, PhD, director of research, Center for Advanced Communication Policy at Georgia Tech. Mark Harness, PhD, director for the Center of Technology and Disability Studies at the University of Washington. Anna Ordway, the program specialist with the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and in Rehabilitation Research at NIDLR, ACL, and HHS. So without much more attention, I will turn this over to Carolyn Phillips to share with us. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you, Dave, and hello, everybody. Wonderful to be with all of you today, and I'm presenting with some of my favorite folks. I'm so glad that everybody could join us today. Anne was not able to join us, but just know that she's very involved, obviously, as our project officer involved in this project. So we're going to be talking with you about something that a lot of you have helped with. We have several very exciting updates, but also pieces to this whole project with the AT3 AT Access interface, but especially talking about the backbone of the whole thing, which is Maureen's baby, which is the AT network, and then of course several other pieces that are also interfaces and approaches. And then of course that we say it all the time, nothing about us without us. We don't just say it, but we actually mean it. So you're going to hear about some of the great work that Dr. Moon's been doing when it comes to focus groups. And then of course, knowledge translation from one of the KT experts in the world, as far as I'm concerned, Dr. Harness. So we're going to be spending time with you. Know that this is a conversation that can, and we hope it does, continue long after we finish this hour. As I said, a lot of you have been key to this conversation. You've been a part of this whole process as we're moving through and developing these tools. And often I hear, and we talk about the things that we have learned from y'all when it comes to making sure that this is a tool that points back to experts, that points back to AT experts, to the AT Act, that it's actually something that helps move the field forward. I hear Maureen all the time talking about community, network, those types of important terms. And then once again, making sure that we're getting the word out. So you're going to see where we are when it comes to some of this really cool work with the interfaces. You're going to hear also about some of what we're doing when it comes to our aging well, best practices and data modeling, machine learning, predictive analytics, those types of things. And then you'll also hear about smart sourcing and crowdsourcing, which, as I said, a lot of you have been involved in. I remember being in meetings with a lot of you in the past where we would hear about, these kinds of tools. Oh gosh, what's really happening here. But know that absolutely this is something that it's developing in a way that I think is very smart, very inclusive. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn this on over to Maureen, and she'll talk to you more about our sponsors. So Maureen?
Great. So I just wanted to start by talking about the two projects that we received in the fall of 2020. These are disability and rehabilitation research projects from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research. We call them DRIPs affectionately, and they're larger grants that focus on a single topic of work. The AT Network's focus was on building a community of practice around assistive technology, while Access for Aging Well's focus was to help people who are aging with or into disabilities select the technologies they need to sustain living in their community of choice. And these projects are interrelated. We obviously couldn't plan on them being funded simultaneously, but we're ecstatic that they were. But as a result, they're designed to stand alone from each other and yet interact with each other. And this interaction is sort of what strengthens the work that we're doing here, strengthens the suite of resources that we refer to as the AT Access projects. If I could have the next slide, Carolyn. So the figure here on this slide shows how the two DRIPs are interrelated, in addition to showing how other access projects are involved. There are 3 large rectangles at the top of the screen with lines that point to the center one, and 2 smaller rectangles at the bottom of the screen with lines pointing down from the rectangle above them. The center large yellow rectangle, you see where we're developing a community of practice. This community of practice consists of an AT product database, technical assistance materials, and plenty of opportunity for community discussion and interaction. The larger rectangles on each side in orange and blue, go Wahoos, are 2 projects that assist people with disabilities and their support in making decisions around the technologies that are right for them. The one on the left focuses on aging and bases the decision support tools on data analytics. And this is based on data that we acquired from the state aging services databases. This one also had a pilot that focused on only 2 activities of daily living to show the proof of concept. And the one on the right focuses on workplace accommodations. This is the one you all may have participated in crowdsourcing focus groups about, because it uses that approach to build independent decision trees to help in the selection of AT. And these 2 methods have advantages and disadvantages over each other. So while we look at data analytics as an automated way to do it that might be more sustainable, we realize we do have to get in there from time to time and really have the experts say, no, this is how you pick it. Because obviously if we could do it by machine, then I guess we wouldn't need us. And clearly that's not the case. Finally, we know that a one-size-fits-all approach is the best approach for all of our populations. And so we're generating 2, for now, custom interfaces to these resources. And the smaller rectangles in the second row, one interface focuses on the needs of assistive technology practitioners in finding information on existing assistive technology. And the second focuses on the needs of those with non-cognitive impairment and helps in the selection of technology, back to that aging AT selection tool. So if I could have the next slide. So this is the same framework, it just names the projects and you can see how they interact with each other. Obviously, the Assistive Technology Network was the online community of practice in the center top. Access for Aging Well and Work Access are the decision support tools on each side. And the AT3 Center and Georgia Division of Aging Services are the custom interfaces. Next slide. Carolyn, did you want to go over that?
Yes, thank you. And it's great. I always appreciate hearing Maureen, who is an engineer, explaining all of those things. We've looked at all different ways to draw that out, and it's great. So the work that we are doing, where it's more some of those predictive analytics, modeling, working with actually a lot of you, obviously, you know, our folks at WATAP, and then a whole bunch of other folks, which is great. It builds upon the DON-R, and several of you have met with us at ATIA and met with us at other conferences. You know, when Martha and I and Maureen and other folks on our team are there, and started actually mapping out, doing this whole decision tree is what we were calling it originally, and seeing, you know, how do we get from point A to point B? So the big change with Access for Aging Well and the DRIP is really applying statistical analysis techniques, analytic queries, and automatic and automated machine learning algorithms to the data sets to really create those predictive models. We're working with some folks here at Georgia Tech, Dr. Ross, Catherine Ross, and her team at the Center for Regional Growth, Regional Development. No, what is it, Maureen? Regional Growth and CQRE.
Quality research.
It's quality.
Yeah, it's quality.
Thank you. That's it. I was like, I know there's a
quality
Q.
growth and regional development. Yeah, I have to say the
Thank
acronym.
you.
No problem.
Yes, yes. And so working with them, because they actually have done a lot of this kind of work in the past, and they also include a piece in here about location intelligence. So thinking about all of that and how can we really help people make informed decisions, find connections, find solutions, and then really live their best life. And that's really what this whole project is about. Maureen?
Okay, and this is a broader description of the Assistive Technology Network. One of the cool things about it is that we didn't forget to include the ongoing research, which is one of the things that we hope will make the project sustainable. And the slide shows a circle of rectangles with arrows from each rectangle to the one clockwise from it, and it completes the circle. Doesn't really matter which one is on top because all of these steps are equally important, but just in the way the slide is laid out now, the resources we've described in the community of practice fall in the gray box at about 3 o'clock, and the community of practice use, where people come in and actually interact with the databases and have discussions and that sort of thing, is at 5 o'clock. And as we work toward the development of the community of practice, we continue to analyze databases of the services provided for the past 5 years from our AT Act program partners, and that's the orangish block at noon. This information was fed into the COP development to ensure that we were targeting the AT that was used most predominantly, but also to look for patterns of assistive technology use by specific groups. And once we're developed and operating, outcomes research can be done on the activity in the network. This is at 7 o'clock, and that shows how people are using the network, what technology and features were commonly selected or questioned, and performing a qualitative analysis of the discussion and conversation threads that gather evidence that show which barriers still exist in use of AT and integration into your life. And so ultimately, we hope that all of this activity allows us to show knowledge gains, including increased adoption of AT, decreased rejection of AT, and greater independence. And that's at 9-ish o'clock. And ultimately, we hope that that feeds back into the databases that we're analyzing, and we see patterns and changes of use and how things are actually being recommended and prescribed and then used. So that's that, and thank you for the next slide. And so here's just a conceptual slide of the AT network. For community members, it will operate in a similar way to other familiar social media platforms. The figure depicts the AT network landing page, which shows the community members at the top right corner have the opportunity to create a profile for themselves that would include a simple description of their role, perhaps AT user, provider, counselor, or industry manufacturing representative. We want them in the network as well so that they can accurately represent how their products work. And this will give community members an insight into the frame of reference of the person that they're speaking with on the platform, who's providing information for them. In the top right corner, you see that you can also have a profile of an avatar, which is the community member could choose to customize a photo with a photo or other image, and a notification icon that would lead the community member to previously viewed discussion threads, technology that they may have favorited, and other similar things, just as you would on Pinterest or Reddit, where you've looked at something and you want to read it again, so you mark it. And then the page provides links to the key AT network elements. You can choose to view technical assistance articles that people have written to help people select from specific products within a specific type of technology. And these are from our AT Act program providers. The idea is once they get up on the network, they have a much broader reach, and they can reach consumers in remote areas that are maybe hard for them to get to on a practical level. You can explore assistive technology solutions. That's the AT network product listing itself. And you can connect with other community members in discussion forums. Next slide. And I think that might be back to you, Carolyn.
Thank you so much. So some folks have asked, what does access mean? It is indeed an acronym, and the way we're using it for a lot of the tools is addressing challenges and concerns with everyday strategies and solutions. So the AT3 access tool absolutely is, key to this, and it has that, public facing piece. But there are some deeper dives that we've taken with dementia within that community, within some of the aging agencies that are out there, and just like you heard about work access. But the foundation for all of it is the AT network. A couple of other things that, as we're thinking about how we're designing this and what the goal is, the goal really is to help you, those of you within our ATAC community, to quickly, reliably, and effectively be able to connect consumers and also you to the AT Access suite of resources, which, as you're hearing, there's a whole bunch that's all moving together. So a lot of moving parts. What we know is that technology advancements, they're evolving on a daily basis and really at an astounding rate. It's incredible what's happened when it comes to the evolution of technology, just even since COVID, and how much things have evolved. One of the great things about being at Georgia Tech is also hearing where some of the development is headed, and what some of my awesome colleagues are thinking about. Maureen and Nathan, if you ever get a chance to have lunch or dinner or tea with them, I encourage you to do it, because you'll learn a whole bunch about kind of where things are headed. AT developments are foundational, in this evolution, and as a catalyst for positive change. We know that, life-changing results, no doubt. As somebody who uses assistive technology every day, I can tell you that it's transformational in my life, and absolutely in the lives of so many folks that we work with disabilities and people who are aging, to successfully engage in living, learning, working, and playing. And without a doubt, as an AT practitioner, but also all of you and the ATAC community need quick and reliable interface, way to exchange and get information, and way to interact with the AT network database to assist in providing that important information. These are just some actually screenshots. There are some photos from some of the workshops that some of you have been in with us, where we actually were developing decision trees. It also shows kind of the evolution of the conversation, some of that brainstorming and some of those sessions that we've had with you. And once again, just explaining the story of how it kind of all started. When we're thinking about this, there are those core beliefs, those core things that are a part of the AT Act, which I love. Disability is natural is one of those pieces. And as I said, nothing about us without us is not a cliche. It's actually something we embrace. But the other thing is I've heard a lot of people for several years talking about person-centered design and person-centered, services, all that. And I'm like, we've been doing that for a long time, within the AT Act. So inclusive and person-centered is the idea behind the interface design. Stakeholders from AT3, from the AT Act community, a lot of you met with Dr. Moon, and the disability community are engaging in the process. And once again, getting the stakeholders, users involved to provide that very valuable feedback, not just about the design, navigation, ease of use, the solutions, all of that absolutely is going to be helping. We have meetings actually weekly with some of you, and we appreciate all that you're pouring into this. And once again, it's going to be exponentially changing the way that we work and helping people make better decisions when it comes to AT. This is just interface design process and thinking about where we are. We have several steps here, and there are some that are gold up top. So where we've been working, identifying and defining the problem, researching that problem, design requirements with the focus groups that you're going to hear about from Dr. Moon. And where we are is in that space of designing the solution, the concept, moving quickly into that prototype solution, evaluate the solution results. And then there's a iteration process. So where it keeps going through as we continue to improve this. And this is absolutely where we need a lot of your help. The other thing is we talked with a lot of you about frameworks, and there's Joy Zabala's set, right? That's a framework that a lot of us use. We talked also about Cook and Hussey's HAT framework. There's also the World Health Organization's International Classification of Function and Functioning that a lot of you are familiar with and working from, ICF. And so even though our prototypes don't look like this, this is very much the framework in which we're working from, where we're looking at what's the activity, what's the goal, what are those issues when it comes to participation, what do we need to think about when it comes to personal factors, what do we have to think about when it comes to environmental factors, and how do they help inform what assistive technology strategies and solutions are selected. And then of course, what are the functional limitations, what are the body structure, what are some of those things we need to think about, and then using all of those to move into decisions. So with the AT3 access tool, we are absolutely listening and know that folks wanted us to use the AT Act categories. So what we've done is actually started mapping some of this. So of course you're going to see computer access. You're going to see aids for daily living or daily living activities, activities for daily living, environmental adaptations, recreation, and vehicle modifications when we're talking about activities. And then when we're talking about some of the body function pieces we need to think about, that's where you see hearing, learning, cognition, development, vision, seating, positioning, mobility, and speech communication. That's where you see those pop up. So that helps make the model stronger and helps give good information back to the AT network so we can get the right information back out. And then there are the categories when it comes to environment. So are we talking about a classroom? Are we talking about employment? Are we talking about the community? All of those, as you know, as practitioners and folks in the field, that environment, it makes a huge difference. And so making sure that we're getting the most information as quickly as we can, and then helping y'all be able to help more folks. So I'm going to turn this on over to Dr. Nathan Moon, who's going to talk to you more about interface requirements and the focus groups that are ongoing. So I'll turn it to you.
Sure thing. Thank you very much, Carolyn. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to be with us today and hear about the work that we are doing here at Georgia Tech and with our partner, Mark Harness at the University of Washington. As this slide indicates, we certainly are listening, and our research team was privileged to be able to meet with quite a few of you through the state AT Act programs when we were holding focus groups in the second half of 2021. And some of that work is still ongoing, but we wanted to take a few moments and share with you some of the initial findings that we made in doing this work. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about what you've told us regarding interface requirements. So the requirements for the technical requirements for the interface. Obviously, first and foremost, an accessible interface is of the utmost importance. And so when we discuss this, these are things that are going to conform to best practices that we know about accessibility of all users at all functional levels, and are going to be things that adhere to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0 and 2.1, as well as adhere to the Section 508 standards of the Rehabilitation Act that are put in place by the U.S. Access Board. So let me take a second. When we say the accessibility in this way, there are four principles to the WCAG, if you're aware of these. The first is perceivability, that information and interfaces have to be presentable to ways in which users can perceive, that no bit of information can be invisible to all of the senses. Operable, so that when one is using an interface and navigation, these things are operable, that they don't require interactions that users can't perform. Then secondarily, understandability, that the interface has to be understandable. And then finally, robust, that it can be interpreted reliability by a wide array of agents, and that is including assistive technologies. So, basically what we're saying here, what you've told us is, it's important that this interface have text alternatives to non-text content, that we're mindful of captions and alternatives to multimedia, that we make it as easy as possible for our users to be able to see and hear content. That if you can't use a mouse or you're not a mouse user, that you're going to be able to do all your functionality from a keyboard while not trapping people to the keyboard and things of this nature. So with that, then, hand in hand with things that are accessible, the web page should be as simple as possible, that we don't want to clutter an interface with distractions. So it basically adhering to the ideas presented in the principles of universal design and universal design for learning. Yeah, next slide, please. Again, flexibility to adapt to a wide array of user characteristics and user preferences. So Google is often held up here as, for many people, the gold standard when it comes to a search engine that we wish to model. And then the idea too is that if we're providing these services to clients with an array of experiences and knowledge in the technologies that they are searching for, that we are providing as much flexibility as possible when you're not key to the actual specific terms that you need in order to find it. Ours is often a very technical field, and making it as welcoming as possible to those who are not experts is pivotal. And then finally, and just kind of summing up, that the content be provided in a wide variety of formats. Next slide, please. So in short, we also heard back that people's time is very valuable, and people's energy. I think this is particularly true in the last couple of years as we have all shifted to working differently, that people value their time and they value their energy. And with that, content needs to be as streamlined and concise as possible. People want to know what they are getting themselves into. So the inability to scan content, giving people bulleted summaries or keywords that will help them to decide if this is the resource for them that they want to go down. And people are always going to look at that first page and determine if they need to continue on. And actually, you probably noted, if you are an avid user of Google, that Google has taken the indexing pages in a very similar manner, that it bullets out pretty complex stuff, so you have an idea of what you're getting into. Next slide, please. So beyond the technical interface requirements, we went in and in holding focus groups with users and with professionals, with practitioners. We also wanted to hear more about the content. And the first one is that disability is real, and your onset, whether you are a person with disability who has experienced disability for the entire lifespan and is something that is a part of you, versus somebody who may have an acquired disability and is now beginning to move up a learning curve. These sorts of things matter when it comes to selecting assistive technologies. And hand in hand with going up that learning curve is the role of self-confidence and comfort with very complicated technologies. Particularly, this is true of older clients with late onset functional limitations who may not quite have that willingness to try out new technologies. They want the one solution right away. Others may be willing to try things out. And then finally, in addition to the sorts of learning curve considerations, people really do value the provision of manufacturer provided technical support. Next slide, please. So a big thing is that let's not just view users of assistive technology as such. Let us value them as consumers. Let us be mindful of the agency and the freedom of choice that consumers of our assistive technologies have. This is particularly true of an industry like that for assistive technology, where the reputation, the longevity, and the history of a manufacturer really matters. That branding matters. That consumers of AT really care strongly about the proven track records, and given the expense of the products, they want to know that they are getting the highest quality and the greatest amount of durability as possible, and that whoever is making the product or selling the product is going to be there to support it, especially if we're talking about we're talking about kind of capital pieces of assistive technology are going to carry for years. Given too that we're increasingly kind of moving into an era where a lot of AT may be coming in the form of software as a service, where it's subscription-based, Dragon, for example. People really want to also now know about upfront costs, subscriptions, maintenance costs, and hidden costs. It's not enough to know what you're paying upfront for a given assistive technology product. People need to know the entire sort of sunk costs over the lifetime. And then finally, in addition to cost, will this new piece of technology work with my existing AT? Is this going to fit right on in? And then, while not as much of a consideration, because cost is king for all of us, people also want to know things about warranty, service agreements, and repair information in case those are needed. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn it back over to Carolyn at this point, who I believe will speak to a number of complementary sorts of things that are out there in terms of resources. But back to you, Carolyn.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Nathan. And yes, and also the great work you're doing in this space with everybody. So, and there's a whole lot more. Actually, we're giving you a condensed kind of version of this, but it's really amazing what y'all have shared with us, and we appreciate it, including resources. One of the things that Maureen, Martha Rust, Alan Canoe, and Mark, and a bunch of our team have been working on is, doing that deeper dive to see what's out there, what's great about it, and where can we kind of launch from? What tools are you using currently? And it's not to replace these tools. Obviously, there's a lot of good and very important tools that are out there. And we've been in conversation with some of these folks, for several years, Agriability, their toolbox, bridging apps. And there are links to all of these when you get the presentation. Those are all hyperlinked. But what Easter Seals Greater Houston, what they've done, and figuring out and how to vet and look at some of those apps. I'm always learning from Therese Wilcom too about all of these tools, especially the maker space, but Agriability and apps. The iAccessibility, another online resource. Everything related, if you will, to accessibility of Apple devices. That's another place that y'all are going to get information, resources, and all of that. The Tech Matrix is another that's, had been out there, not hearing as much about it, but it definitely focused on getting some of those tools that are out there. And then we also, Tech Finder is another one. Has a lot of information when it comes to apps and and games for children with learning and attention related disabilities. Tech Toolbox, the ARC came up with this. And a lot of us saw this a few years ago when it was presented to us as a place to find, share, rate, review, technology, primarily focused for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And then, of course, a lot of us are very familiar with the work that has been going on around unified listing for many years. And that's a central database that stores information about AT solutions, access features, all of that. So we absolutely, with the unified listing, for example, see some awesome things about that. When it comes to pulling together information from 12 different databases in Europe, the US, Australia, what have you. And so there's a lot of good information out there. But what we have heard from you and what we have experienced is that there are some gaps that we want to make sure and unique ways that, just like you heard Nathan talking about, that you want to get information and that you need to move quickly through tools and be able to get to solutions pretty quickly. And then also know, once again, that community. What is it that Misty's recommending? What is it that Barclay thinks is, really awesome? How has Molly used, a specific device? And is that something that we could use in Guam or Hawaii or our friends in Alabama? So thinking about all of that and how we can work together. So I'm going to turn this on over to Dr. Harness, who's going to talk to you about this very important part when it comes to getting the word out there, knowledge translation. And so he was so funny. He's like, I'll take 5 minutes, but really take your time. So I'm turning it to you.
Thank you, Carolyn. And I just wanted to start by saying that here at the University of Washington, where in fact the cherry blossoms actually are blooming, we're delighted to be part of these projects. And I wanted to quickly acknowledge two team members, Alan Canu, who's the director of our Washington ATAC program, and Marie Kelly, who is our AT specialist, who've been deeply involved in this work. So Carolyn asked me to talk a little bit about knowledge translation. I will keep it short, but I do want to acknowledge that in a way, these are knowledge translation projects. They weren't funded that way. And they were conceptualized more as development projects, but they really are KT projects. They're projects that are focused on taking evidence and moving it into practice. And so if we use the definition from Neidler, that knowledge translation is the multidimensional active process of ensuring that new knowledge gained through the course of research ultimately improves the lives of people with disabilities and furthers their participation in society. I think you can see that the work here is very much aligned with knowledge translation principles. There has been, as you have heard, so much effort that's been put into understanding what is best practice, and then linking that to what you all have to say and integrating it with the people, integrating the knowledge of people who will be the end users. So I think it's fair to say that these really are KT projects. Looking into the projects themselves, there are additional kind of KT practices that we're engaged in. And I want to, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of clarify that we think of these as integrated knowledge an integrated knowledge translation approach. You may have heard this kind of IKT approach, but it's an approach to collaborative research where researchers work with the knowledge users to identify the problem and have authority to implement research recommendations. And you see this, I think, throughout this presentation. There's stakeholder engagement throughout. So the focus groups, the interview reviews, the eventual usability and appropriateness of recommendations review. There is and will continue to be a lot of user engagement and feedback. And this is really how we get to implementation. And I'll talk about that as well. Next slide. So in addition to that work that's happening in the development process, the integrated KT component, we're also definitely thinking about other aspects of knowledge translation. And in particular, I just wanted to touch on dissemination and implementation. So we are working on dissemination plans to think about how to get information out about both the development work, the products, and then strategies for use of these tools. And we are thinking about traditional publication routes, as we all do, journals, fact sheets, newsletters, etc. But also keeping in mind some not so traditional routes, although some of these are becoming traditional, like Facebook, I know has been around for a long time. But blogs, Facebook, Twitter, and it sounds funny, but we're finding in our work in other spaces that newer social media applications like TikTok have had a lot of uptake related to disability issues and focused on access. And so there will continue to be other spaces where we can try to get information out with the goal of really thinking about who is the end user, how are they going to access this information, and how are we going to get it to them. We also want to think about educational materials that will wrap around the development of these tools, guides, manuals, perhaps courses, toolkits, video, etc. All with the goal really of moving to implementation, uptake in the real world, as Carolyn talked about. And so we are obviously in the middle of these projects, but really thinking about how do we get to implementation, and how do we both think about facilitating implementation, but also how would we measure implementation once we have some products out there. And so I think a lot of the work that we've done to date has helped us to think about acceptability. How do we create something that's acceptable to the end user? Adoption, how do we create something that people want to use and will continue to use? And some of the things we're continuing to think about and will continue to work on are things like cost. How do we create something that is cost effective, both for us to sustain, but also for people to use? How do we measure effectiveness? And when we think about effectiveness in the context of KT, it's not just effectiveness that we measure in sort of controlled research, but how do we look at effectiveness out in the wild, basically? How do we look at effectiveness when it's released? And it's used in a bunch of different contexts that may be different from its initial development. And then a factor that's really critical, obviously, is sustainability, long-term sustainability. And sustainability is an interesting concept, because I think a lot of us, when we think about sustainability, we think about this thing that gets created, how does that thing continue? And yet I think the reality of sustainability is that that product probably doesn't continue forever, but how does the notion of it, or the utility of it, continue, and how does it morph and change and become something that continues to be useful over time? And so these are all things that we are thinking about and continue to work on within the context of these two projects. And next slide. Carolyn, is it back to you?
Yes, and Maureen.
Okay.
So thank you so much, Mark. Really appreciate you walking us through that. And so as Maureen and I are going to walk you through these next few slides, where you're going to get a preview, if you will, of where we're headed with this. And wanted to give a huge shout out, obviously, to ACL, Rob Grenendahl and Lori Gearhart, and obviously our project officers, very, very appreciative for all the work that's gone into this, and the support and the conversations, and of course with AT3 and Audrey and Dave and Marty and Kim helping out in some big ways. So Maureen, do you want to jump on this first slide?
Okay, sure. So we have done some development around the interface for the AT3, interface for the product database, and sort of the selection process that goes with that. And just want to shout out to our graphics designer who's done a lot of work around this. But the idea is that you would be able to select technology based on activity, body functions and structures, and environmental factors. And if you think back to Carolyn's explanation of the ICF and the World Health Organization's model for participation in activity and using technology, these very, these very closely match many of the factors in that model. So it becomes a stepwise process as you sort through those things. I'm gonna pass it to Carolyn for a minute.
It's allergy season down here, y'all. So thank you. Maureen, you are doing a great job working through this. So So
Sorry.
as y'all can see, clean, we're hearing you, you want clean, simple. We put the ICF, actually that drawing that you saw in front of a lot of you and asked, how do you want this to be presented? And this is how a lot of you came back to us and said, hey, this is what we're thinking. Right here, just like we talked about before, you see activity. A lot of these match with the AT Act categorization. And then there's some additional pieces where there's so many more searches for these specific topics of reading, writing, organization, that like we're talking like thousands, tens of thousands of more searches. So also being smart about the way that information is presented and helping once again, you get to the solution quicker. Maureen and I have talked about for years of Name That Tune. So a lot of you who are familiar with that show, and if you're not familiar with that show, it's really how many notes can we get? How many notes do you need in order to name that tune? And so that's what we're also trying to do here is how many clicks does it take to get you to that solution or that, that wealth of information that can get you to the next part of the conversation.
I think you just aged us in front of
I
everyone.
know, I might have. It's a show that people used to watch before we were born.
Exactly. So also, as we're talking about the, Carolyn mentioned the activities that were the ICF activities requested by the ATAC providers. We also put in the ICF body functions and structures list again. How many notes do you need to actually name that tune? What body functions are impacted, what are the functional limitations that need to be addressed, and in selecting that. You go to the next slide, you think?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
then,
oh yes,
go
please.
ahead.
No, you.
And then lastly, what is the environment of use? This is again under the ICF AT providers recommendations. Are we looking at employment? What are the requirements of the employment environment? How are those different from community living, and what could we do in community that would be different? And also considering the factors that are involved in that in selecting the environment.
Another big part of the conversation that we're having is, and this is where we're coming right back to you, not just with what do you think about the other pieces that we just are showing, but how do you want information really presented? We heard how you want it presented. Now that we're presenting information, is this how you really want it presented? How many solutions do you want to show up? Do you want to be able to like or love these? Do you want to be able to save this somehow? Those are things that are critical as we're in this development process. How much information is too much information? How much jargon? Do you need the breadcrumbs? And that's where you can see how did you actually end up at the solution. And so, yeah, Maureen, anything else you want to say about this page?
No, I think you've got it.
All right. So some of the next steps of the conversation, it's exactly, and Maureen actually wrote this out without any problem because she's so used to these types of exercises that are so important to development. So going through and having that intentional dialogue, and asking these questions, overall, how did you like the look and feel of each of those pages? The fonts, font sizes, color schemes, obviously accessibility, right? So enough information, not enough information, too much information, all of that. Nathan and Maureen, do y'all want to weigh in? I'll move to the functional list.
I think the only thing that I would sort of weigh in here to say is simply that I think there's a recognition that we are all in search of a common terminology, a common dialogue or language here when we are discussing functional limitations that some people might want to prefer to discuss it, frame it in terms of their abilities rather than disabilities. And for other people, they would rather frame it in terms of what they can't do. And sort of, it's a way of trying to do this, but be respectful to the variety of preferences that do exist.
Mhm. Thank you,
Certainly.
Nathan.
Yeah,
Maureen?
and many of these questions are based on usability heuristics. Many people are familiar with the Nielsen-Norman usability heuristics, and making sure that the page is easily navigable, the words and terms on it mean what people think that they mean. There's an extraneous information, people can kind of recover from an error they make. And just making sure that the experience itself is good across all of the different access platforms that we've been working on.
Very good.
Mhm.
So this is the solutions result list, just like you heard Maureen and Nathan saying. Similar questions, what did you think should be clickable? What else when it comes to, visit icon, print box, that heart, like or love, right? Review, all of that. And reviews do matter when it comes to all of the analytics piece, the predictive analytics, the modeling. And so that's part of why we really need your help as this is implemented in order for it to grow, learn. Those are fundamental pieces, is to be able to get that feedback, closing that feedback loop. The other thing, I just want to say, as we're talking about next steps, we are going to be running through a lot of next steps, including more dialogue with all of you, also, different iterations of this. And then also thinking about, implementation, testing it with some of y'all, all of that. So Maureen, Nathan, and Mark, do y'all want to weigh in on any of this?
I think it just goes back to that design process image that you showed with the individual steps, and how there's an iterative piece where you build what you think matches the needs people say that they have. And then you bring that to people and say, okay, what did we get right? And what did we get wrong? And what needs to be changed? And that's sort of an iterative process that we'll be going through, where we're doing usability testing with people, making sure the system works the way we think it does, the way people actually want it to, moving that forward in that way. But I'll pass it off to other folks.
Well, I think that it's hard to be everything to everyone. And that in many ways is the grand challenge that we face, is that when we design an interface and then bring it back, we may get very contrasting points of view about its usefulness or its usability, and that there's nothing wrong with that, but a recognition, as Maureen points out, that it's a process, and we're always striving to arrive, even if it never seems like we're ever arriving at the station for everybody. But want to emphasize that we are listening. We are interested, and trying to meet the needs of as many people as possible. And if a design decision inadvertently doesn't, match up, that sometimes these are very hard decisions we're having to make.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, this project and this group of projects, it keeps me up in a good way at night, thinking about all the good stuff that's going to come from this. And how, when we think about legacy, I think all of us in this community on this call right now will be able to be proud of this many years from now, because I think it's going to be one of those things that, folks are going to say, well, thank goodness somebody thought to do that. And the somebody is all of y'all, all of us, working collaboratively together. And I absolutely love this work, and it's a true honor to work with Maureen, Nathan, Mark, Martha, Alan, but actually Rob, everybody, Lori. And so we really do appreciate, obviously, ATAP, Audrey, and AT3 investing in this and being with us on this journey. And then also, of course, HHS and ACL, and seeing how this really can be transformational and exponentially change the way that we're able to support people. So Mark, anything you want to add to the conversation?
No, that's brilliant.
Yay. So thank you all. And I'm sure as you were looking through, I know I have been right where y'all are, where I'm like, oh my gosh, there's some things that are missing. There's some things that, maybe should be said a little differently. We want that feedback, and, constructive criticism, welcome, any kind of feedback. So please do email us, any of us. If you find resources that you like, email us, let us know. And so thank you all, and just wanted to once again acknowledge where the funding's coming from, and very, very thankful for that. So any questions? Maureen, anything that you want to?
I'm noticing in the chat that there's a newer version of Name That Tune out, so maybe we're not as old as we projected ourselves to be.
There's a, what did you say?
There's a new version of Name That Tune out, apparently.
Oh, yeah.
We can use that. We can use that again.
We just saw that show for the first time.
Kelly Clarkson does Name That Tune on her show, so it's still around.
Still around.
Good.
Good to know.
Thanks, whoever pointed that out. That's great.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Any questions for us? And thanks for your time. Time's the most valuable thing we've got, and I appreciate y'all all of you who are working on the project, investing that time with us, and then of course everybody who's listening from across the states and territories. Very thankful for all of you.
Thank you very much, Carolyn, Maureen, Mark, Nathan. Really thankful to have you present this information to all of us today. Carolyn, if you would like to stop sharing your screen. And Jamie, you could stop the recording. I'd just like to wrap up the day by thanking